hunger is a political choice. And yes, you can see many countries in the world that will export crops and still have a lot of domestic hunger. And what that points to is that perhaps the exporters have far too much political power. If we're serious about eradicating hunger, maybe we need to take some power from the exporters and align it with constituencies that are fighting to end hunger domestically.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to our podcast, The Zero Hunger Project. And today we're going to talk about a topic from fuel to fork: food sovereignty, health, and the true cost of what we eat. And Stacia, you want to talk about who we are talking to today?
Well, I'm very happy to welcome Raj Patel to our podcast today. Raj is an award-winning author, filmmaker, and research professor at the Lyndon B. Johnson School of Public Affairs at the University of Texas at Austin. His work bridges food policy, economic justice, global development, and environmental health. Raj is the co-author of Inflamed: Deep Medicine and the Anatomy of Injustice, which explores the connections between structural inequality, environmental breakdown, and chronic health outcomes. He's also a thought leader in the global food sovereignty movement, advocating for democratic control of food systems and equitable access to nutritious food. A frequent media contributor and speaker, Raj continues to challenge how we think about hunger, health, and justice in the 21st century. He has degrees from the University of Oxford, the London School of Economics, and Cornell University. So he's a super slacker, obviously. He's been doing nothing with your time. His research focuses on world food systems, alternatives to industrial agriculture, and policy changes that address food insecurity, equity, and environmental degradation. He regularly writes opinion pieces, gives public lectures, and engages in media commentary about food justice, health equity, and sustainable development. We're so happy that you've joined us this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Stacey. That was quite the introduction. And my dad still wonders why I'm not a proper doctor.
Why you're not a proper doctor. Right.
I hear that all the time. And I'm not even a doctor. Never mind.
You're not even an improper doctor.
No, exactly. But I still hear back in an Indian household, you're a doctor, a lawyer, or you're nobody.
Oh, yeah.
Or engineer. That's the other
Sure.
thing. So I'm kind of nobody. But anyway, so Raj, it's a pleasure to have you here. And I am super excited to talk about your latest book, The Inflame. And hear a little bit about the Inflame talks about how systems of injustice, from colonialism to capitalism, are literally making people and the planet sick. How do you see food insecurity as both a symptoms and driver to the system-wide inflammation?
It's a great question, Sumana. I mean, the idea that Rupa Maria and I were getting at in this book is that, if you look at the way that capitalism has structured the way, not just that we eat, but the way that we live, for a vast majority of the world, food insecurity is closer than one might hope. And for 2 billion people, food insecurity is right there as a daily reality. So I think the big issue that we're pointing to is that by making it really hard for communities to get access to sustainably grown, healthy food all the time, we are part of a system that is really gearing up our bodies for a condition of almost permanent stress. And what that results in, of course, is systemic inflammation. Inflammation can be a good thing, like when you get a paper cut and your body mobilizes resources to help you heal. That kind of inflammation, where your skin will get warmer and your body will mobilize its immune system to be able to help fend things off. All of that's terrific. The trouble is that when you have chronic inflammation, when your body is perpetually in a fight or flight mode, that sets you up for a lifetime of negative health consequences. And this is also part of the story when it comes to thinking about our food system. I mean, if you're thinking about food insecurity, not knowing where your next meal is coming from, that condition of stress, regardless of what you're eating, is itself a driver of poor health. Then layer onto that the fact that perhaps the only kinds of food you're going to be able to afford are foods that are ultra processed. And then you start getting into systems in which the kinds of ingredients that are cheap and profitable are the ones to which you have the greatest access. And if that's the situation, then it's no surprise that we live with these cycles of inflammation, of our bodies being stressed and then having access to poor quality food, and then our bodies, in response to this poor quality food, developing the kinds of diseases of exposure to ultra processed food and the modern food system, about which we hear so much, and which are driving, again, healthcare costs sky high. There was a recent report by the Rockefeller Foundation looking at the real cost of food in America. And what they found was that for every dollar we spend on food here in the United States, we spend an additional dollar on healthcare just to treat the things that food has caused in terms of bodily damage. And then, of course, there's another extra dollar to deal with environmental harms and social harms. But a one-for-one dollar for dollar, food in, healthcare money out is the way that our food system is structured right now.
Would be interesting to do a deep dive on who's profiting from that.
Well, and it's not terribly surprising. You can, I think you can see them listed in, in the
literally everywhere.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You recently wrote an article on food sovereignty in South Africa, and true, yes.
Yes, that's right. Yes, yes, Stacey. There are a lot of Raj Patels, though, so you're wise to check.
But you wrote in that article about the paradox of food exports and domestic hunger. How has that manifested sort of globally, and what does that say about what's happening in the United States and Canada and North America, if you can speak to that?
There's a very quick answer here, which is that food in general is not treated as something to which people have a right. Food is a means to make money. And when you understand food as just another commodity like widgets or aircraft or cell phones, then of course it makes sense. No one would bat an eyelid by saying, well, there are lots of countries that export cell phones, but not everyone in that country has a cell phone. You'd be like, fine, yeah, these are poorer countries that are trying to make their way up the ladder of gross domestic product growth. And sure, there may be things that get exported from this country that not everyone has. Brazil is a large exporter of airplanes. Does everyone in Brazil have an airplane? No. That's fine. There's some ways in which we shouldn't be surprised by that. But in fact, Brazil is an interesting case. Brazil is one of the largest agricultural powerhouses on the planet. And in many ways, it's the Canada of the global South. It's vast amounts of land really handed over to a single crop. While there are some incredible farmers movements, particularly for smaller scale operations and more diversified operations, there are also in Brazil large agricultural powerhouses that really shape agricultural policy. So in Brazil. And so the story there is that Brazil, as it sort of deforests the Amazon, the forces behind that are industrial agricultural businesses. Brazil is exporting hand over fist. And recently we saw this amazing natural experiment in Brazil, because under the Lula administration, Brazil decided, we have this agricultural powerhouse, and they have genetically modified crops, and they're spraying, and they're deforesting the Amazon. But really what we understand, that hunger is a political issue. So fine, we'll not impede these farmers from making a whole ton of money, but we will redirect some of the taxation that they pay into ending hunger domestically. And the first Lula administration brought hunger down to the extent that Brazil, for the first time in recent history, was removed from the world hunger map. It had less than 2% of its population were undernourished. Then the Bolsonaro administration came in, and obliterated these policies. And now, under Bolsonaro, the Brazil got back on the hunger map. And then the Lula administration returned again and restored these policies that they once had. So what does this tell you? Well, it tells you that merely exporting a ton of things is not an indicator of whether a country is or isn't food secure. What matters is not whether a country is exporting a lot. What matters is the domestic balance of power that has decided whether to treat hunger as something that can be eradicated or just doesn't give a crap. And Brazil has experienced both. And I think the lesson there is a universal one, which is hunger is a political choice. And yes, you can see many countries in the world that will export crops and still have a lot of domestic hunger. And what that points to is that perhaps the exporters have far too much political power. And again, the suggestion would be that if we're serious about eradicating hunger, maybe we need to take some power from the exporters and put it align it with constituencies that are fighting to end hunger domestically.
We've also talked to several guests who've correlated hunger to homelessness and how, they're sort of inexorably linked. And in some cases, some of these communities have gone after homelessness as an issue and then have been able to tackle hunger as a result of the homelessness issue. It would be interesting to see where that shows
100%.
up.
100%. Especially in a lot of countries, as you said, Raj, food insecurity might not be the access to food issue. Availability of food might be there, but it's a political will.
That's right. I mean, here in America, in fact, just this weekend in the United States Department of Agriculture decided to abandon its survey for food security. So now we don't even know how many people, or we won't even know how many people are food insecure in the United States. And our ignorance will allow all kinds of things to happen in the United States. But you're absolutely right. I mean, here's a country that's absolutely, embarrassingly wealthy. And so the problem isn't that this country doesn't have a high enough GDP. It's that it has abandoned its working class and its low-income communities to the market and is quite happy to allow hunger to blossom.
Last time I checked the data, there were 18 million Americans who did not have enough food to eat.
No, it's far higher than that. The last accurate data I remember seeing was closer to 40 million people were experiencing food insecurity. So it could be 12 million
18
households.
million households.
Yeah.
That makes all the sense. It's unfortunate. I saw that over the weekend, and I realized I'm not surprised that the current administration has stopped recording that data because we don't want to know the truth.
No, and in this era where inconvenient facts are politically biased in and of themselves, this administration is also eradicating precisely those difficult things to acknowledge, like climate change and data around poverty and racial inequality and gender inequality as well.
And as we speak with the UNGA, I'm eager to see what comes out of there, the General Assembly.
What would be the sort of maximally best outcome to come out of the UN General Assembly?
For me, the best outcome would be the world uniting around causing more peace, which helps in a little more food security around the world. Will that happen? I am not optimistic, but that would be my best case scenario. What about you?
Well, I mean, that's my big worry with the UN being held hostage by the US at the moment. I think that what one would hope for precisely these commitments to be not just announced, but delivered upon. I mean, that's always been the problem with the UN in recent years, is that even in the best of times, countries will accede to various kinds of declaration, but never really deliver anything. And I think the UN General Assembly only works when there is this dialectical process between what happens at the very highest level and what happens at the grassroots, because governments are not going to do anything unless they're made to these days.
Exactly. And especially, I'm very impressed that our Prime Minister decided to show up and go to the General Assembly. It more than anything, it puts a statement out. And our Prime Minister has said it many times, if the time comes that the United States is not ready to lead, we will. So I'm curious to see what comes out of it. He's having a lot of meetings as we speak with a lot of economic powers, and he's an economist by trade. So I'm actually looking forward to see what actually turns out.
He's a badass, basically. Our prime minister is a stone cold badass.
Now we need action.
I know, we do. And I know that's highly problematic for a whole lot of people, and they don't agree with me, but I don't care. I think he's awesome.
That's amazing. So the IPES, which is the Food Report Fuel to Fork, outlines just how dependent our food system are on fossil fuels. What do you see as most dangerous consequences of that? And where are the biggest opportunities for change?
Well, the International Panel of Experts on Sustainable Food Systems, which you wisely reduced to IPES, we're sort of a mixed body of people from various academic disciplines who are independent of any particular governmental or industry body. And so we're able to take a look at things like how much fossil fuel is in our food system. I mean, honestly, I was shocked that 40% of petrochemicals go towards something in the food system, whether it's packaging or whether it's ingredients. And obviously, the fertilizer that is generated in order to be able to grow our food is also a big driver of climate change. And if one's thinking about vulnerabilities, well, the fact that we are hostage to these kinds of technologies is in and of itself a problem. I worry about the ways in which essentially fossil fuels are a sort of point of addiction for modern industrial agriculture. And you've seen it when Russia invaded Ukraine, and you've seen it in a range of other kind of spikes caused by international incidents. Like for example, when Egypt stopped producing fertilizer because of the gas pipelines being compromised because of the genocide. You've got this horrible situation in which farmers around the world depend on these fossil fuels, and they've been de-skilled by the chemical industry to the extent that switching from industrial agriculture to something more sustainable is not something that is easy to imagine. And so that for me is the greatest vulnerability, but it is also the greatest opportunity. I was just in Sri Lanka, where the international peasant movement, La Via Campesina, which has claims 200 million members around the world. Via Campesina was having its third global forum. And the fact that Sri Lanka was the venue, I think, was quite interesting because if you recall a couple of years ago, but Sri Lanka cut its imports of industrial fertilizer. And it did this not because all of a sudden they'd become hippies and decided that they wanted to go organic, but because of a horrible series of events that resulted in Sri Lanka running out of foreign exchange because of corruption, both domestically and internationally. And so all of a sudden there were no fertilizers available, and it was a horrific mess. Everybody that I spoke to, organic farmers, conventional farmers, everyone thought it was a disaster. But what we've seen is that right now there are some really interesting trials going on where farmers are switching from one year to another, from industrial to organic, but not just regular organic, but a really rich agroecological system. And what they're finding is that particularly for these sustainable farmers, you're able to switch from one year to another and not lose money. And this is a huge breakthrough because, you may have heard the struggle of farmers in Canada, for example, to switch from conventional wheat to organic wheat, and it takes years to get the certification, but it also takes years for the yield curve to sort of recover after not using industrial fertilizers. But how magic is it that with the right kinds of science and the right kinds of applications of research and of innovation, you can smooth the curve of transition not to 3 years, but really to one season. And that, I think, is the great opportunity for so many people around the world, is that with advances in the science of agroecology, you're seeing the yield gap drop to a negligible amount and people making money right off the bat. And that, I think, is a great, great opportunity.
Yeah, for sure. You've long spoken about corporate concentration in food systems. I'm wondering how corporate control intersects with our ability or our inability to achieve food justice and sovereignty. What are your thoughts on that?
Again, Stacey, I think the great restriction on our ability to achieve food justice is our capacity to demand it and to imagine that it might happen. And again, the Brazil case is exhibit A for me. Administration decide, actually, we're going to end hunger. We're going to make sure that everyone gets to eat. Then another administration says, no, we don't care about that. But the second administration, the Bolsonaro administration, was very much in the hands of large agribusiness. And ultimately, these businesses exist not for any philanthropic reason, but because they exist to make profit. And making profit requires buying cheap and selling dear, whether that's inputs or whether that's human labor or whether that's land. And often the most efficient ways to do that involve skirting the law or flouting it entirely. So I think, yes, the food industry in particular is unique in being able to get society to pick up the tab for its mess. There's no other industry in the world where you buy $1 of the stuff and society picks up $2 extra in cost. There's nothing like that. So what allows that to happen? Well, in part, it's centuries of practice at being able to get society to pick up the tab, normalizing the fact that agriculture is low-wage work, normalizing the fact that actually enslaved people need to be doing it rather than well-paid workers, normalizing the fact that, yes, if there is disease that comes from the sale of these products, it's not the company necessarily that has to pick up the tab, it's society in general. All of these ideas have become normal, not because they are normal, but because it's much more profitable for them to, for industrial food, if we pretend that actually in the industrial food system is not responsible for these things. So I think absolutely, Stacey, you're bang on that. If we want justice, then we do need to take a step back and think, well, where do these ideas about justice and the border of what's possible and what's unthinkable come from? And when we ask that question and follow the money back, we'll often find food lobbying bodies in one form or another that are pushing constantly to lower the wage rate or suspend regulations or in one way or another dodge accountability for the problems that they've caused.
No, absolutely. So, if we were to design a truly anti inflammatory food system, one that heals people and the planet both, what would the first three ingredients would be and why?
Well, I mean, it would be tedious and predictable for me to say politics, politics, politics.
How do you bring about the downfall of late-stage capitalism, Raj? Is basically what we're asking about.
That's
Could
it.
you explain that?
Well, I have a small recipe here, but I mean, partly the issue is that we need to stop doing a whole bunch of things. I mean, often when we imagine what the solution will be, we contrive some sort of additional magic thing that we're all going to do, and then that will be fine. We're going to eat more kale or acai, or all of a sudden, if only everyone grows veggies in their backyard, that will bring about the downfall of late stage capitalism. That's not going to happen. I mean, I grow veggies in my backyard. I eat a lot of kale. I like acai. All of these things are fine. But none should believe that just by shopping better, we will transform the food system. Because the system has been set up independent of us, and despite our attempts to actually enact transformation within it. There's no shopping for land reform. There's no shopping for workers' power and unions. There are these little B Corps that say, well, we're trying a little harder. But where are you going to buy these B Corp things? But in a supermarket owned by these agribusiness giants. So I do think that politics has to be a part of this. And if that feels like, oh, I don't want to do that, this is the moment where agribusiness has got you by the nads. Because, I mean, often we're led to believe that the kinds of transformation we need if we want an anti-inflammatory food system is just to go out and buy some anti-inflammatory stuff. And that impulse to shop for change rather than to organize for it is where the agribusiness sort of mindset has really got us pretty tightly. And just unlocking that is quite important. And then if we're serious about specific transformations, then I certainly think that things like land reform, things like reparation for damage caused by these agribusinesses, we know where the money has gone, and we know who has the deep pockets that need to be emptied in order to pay for the damage that has been caused. We know all of this, and stopping what we're doing is a really good thing. So I do think that if we engage in a kind of politics of reparation and restoration and care, in which social movements are leading the way, we can actually develop this anti-inflammatory food system. But it does require action, not shopping.
I'm
Love it.
totally here for the whole concept of not shopping for change, but organizing change. Like,
Love
I
it.
feel like we need to put that on like T-shirts and bumper stickers and bus shelters and things like that, because it really is. It's quite a slogan.
He actually did give me the three ingredients:
Hmm.
reparation, restoration, and care. I got it.
Oh, well done, Raj. Way to go.
That's
It was
perfect.
easier than we thought it was going to be. No
Yeah.
big deal.
That's
Um,
amazing.
Okay, so I ask this question of every guest, and I guess the thing is that for me, coming from a social justice background, I look at us all trying to thrive inside of systems of power that were created by, for, and in service of a particular subset of the population over literally everybody else. And it's a subset that's not even reflective of the actual global population. And we all have to sort of thrive inside of this. Knowing that and having these conversations and not getting disillusioned by the seemingly enormous work that needs to be done and how kind of depressing this all is at a meta level, what is your best case scenario? Like, what's your pie in the sky best case result? And I mean, I know on the meta level you just answered that question, but like right now, from a grassroots perspective, for example, or what is your best case outcome for this? How do you stay positive and hopeful and optimistic, particularly in Texas?
Well, I get to work with social movements all the time, and they are fighting sometimes absolutely for their lives, but also for every inch of land and for every bushel of corn and for the right to exist and the right to dignity. So it would be wild for me to say, well, it's all for shit, because I think it would betray the struggle of which I'm part just to give up, and I think that's uh, that's where I get my energy from is particularly recognizing that there is a world that exists in radical formations, even in Texas, right? I mean, there's people forget often that it was the South in the United States that has always been the most radical, particularly rural South, where that has incubated some of the most radical movements. And I just did a bit of research looking at the sort of rural origins of the Black Panther Party, and there have been fantastic books about this in talking about Oakland. And I was doing some of the similar work thinking about Houston, and there's incredible stuff even here in Texas.
Well, in the Republic of Austin, also, there's lots of stuff.
Well, I mean, we're fighting the very good fight here in Austin. There's some terrific organizations, like, for example, supporting refugees, that you wouldn't think exist in Texas, and yet we have some of the best in the country. Similarly, our food policy here, we've got an incredible food policy manager who, over the past 10 years, has been consulting in neighborhoods and working with ambassadors who go out and help sponsor conversations not only about the food system but about climate change, so that we developed one of the best municipal food system policies in North America. And like, it's amazing. It's amazing what's possible despite the madness. So I think, to answer your question about, what's the best case scenario? I mean, I do think that the organizing that is happening on the ground, despite this poly crisis, despite the militarization and the sort of lurch to the right and climate change, everything. Yeah, no, despite it all, is not just a sort of back of envelope sort of, oh, if only we could have this. It's about making stuff happen on the ground because communities need it on the ground today. And that's what I love about that process, is that whether it's here in Austin or whether it's in South Africa or in India or Brazil, the movements I get to work with are doing it on the ground now, rather than waiting for the pie to. How does the pie in the sky thing work exactly? Does the pie float up? Does it descend? I don't know. But they're not waiting for the pie. They realize that they need it now, and that, I think, the only way that we can fight this is not by sort of making big plans for the future, but surviving now.
Onto a foothold and pushing out. My other question that I ask guests often is, of all the stuff that you talk about and all of these different sort of projects that seem to be going on, what are the questions that people aren't asking you? Is there something you're working on that you want to get the message out on? Is there something that you haven't been able to talk about as much as you'd like to? What's missing for us in terms of education and in terms of finding out how other people are handling these problems?
Well, I mean, the thing that I'm working on at the moment is thinking through what happens after US hegemony and how, what that looks like for the rest of the world. And that's going to be super interesting for Canada.
Explain what US hegemony means for people who don't know.
So in the sort of long arc of capitalism, and here I'm drawing on a sociologist, absolute genius, Giovanni Arrighi. And so he was talking, in his work of the long 20th century, he's observed, look, capitalism has gone through cycles where there's been one country that's been leading and has been above all in being able to accumulate things over a cycle. At the early sort of stage of capitalism, it was the Genoese, and then it moved into the Dutch and then the British. And now we're in a sort of American phase which sort of begins roundabout the end of World War II and has had a sort of crisis about halfway through in the 1970s, where the industrialists who had really driven the accumulation that the US had over the course of decades had a crisis moment. And then, as you've seen in lots of previous eras, the industrialists or the merchants or the people who make things gave way to the people who turned things into money, into financiers and bankers. And really, since the 1970s, the bankers have been in control of the United States, or leading the United States economy. And what we're seeing now is the decline of the bankers. And when that happens, and when it's happened historically, when the financiers kind of lose control and they kind of spin out, we see fairly dangerous times, but also times with a lot of opportunity. If you look at historically the moments when fascism has been on the rise, you've also seen some of the most amazing experiments in ending hunger, and some of the most amazing experiments in what governments might do if things were planned differently. And these experiments happen not just in other countries, but also in the country that's undergoing collapse or undergoing transformation. So I think that's the question that I'm really interested in thinking through, particularly for Canada and Mexico, for instance, of what happens after the US goes through this moment and emerges much weaker, much smaller, and much less important compared to other powers in the world. What does that mean for Canada? What does that mean for Mexico? I think those questions. I think that there's a certain amount of political leadership at the moment that imagines that it's possible to go back to the way things were, and I don't think that's correct. I don't think that there's that what has been broken can be unbroken, not just because this particular administration is crazy, but because actually, if you look at the sort of arc of the way that capitalism has worked in the United States, there's not historically been a kind of reversal that's been possible given where we're at. So if we take seriously not just the sort of epiphenomena of Trump and or Biden, but rather take more seriously the sort of deep structural change, then we've got an America that's substantially weaker. And I'm curious about what that means for, as I say, for Pacific and Atlantic countries like Mexico and Canada.
It's interesting, too, when you think about the history of the United States, that there was a time when basically capitalism, well, the capitalists, the families like the Rockefellers and whatnot, they still had quite a thick social conscience. So they set up all the national parks. They donated a lot of land. They donated a lot of their wealth. So they were practicing capitalism. A lot of these people were bootleggers and, like denizens of iniquity, but still, like, it was during the war. They were capitalizing on things, but they still had a social conscience. They were still contributing to the public good. And to me, that's where I think those two things can exist at the same time. And that's where we've deviated.
I think it totally can, but we are seeing, as Raj, you were mentioning, we are seeing what Canada, Mexico, the East, Russia, China, India, they're all how they're working with Europe, Canada working very closely with Europe, and seeing how the not only just trade alliance, but also the arms alliance and security alliance, how they are building. It's fascinating.
Yeah. This might be a case of be careful what you wish for, but it's going to be nice to see what somebody else's hand on the tiller does.
Yeah, but I think you're right. I mean, history hasn't always bent towards progress in that respect. And particularly when you hear Trump thinking sort of Arctic century thoughts, with his eye on Greenland and of course Canada, it's not entirely clear that future is so benign.
Yeah, they're dangerous days, dark days. Well, and also, I mean, the other thing that needs to be said is not only is our Prime Minister a stone cold badass, but I think you're also a stone cold badass, Raj. Totally. I think the stuff you're doing is really cool, and I am very into your message and the work, the extraordinary work that you've dedicated your life towards, and the good that you're putting out in the world. I have a lot of respect and admiration for that.
And we look forward to hearing a lot more.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to our paths crossing again in the future too.
Thanks a lot, Raj, for your time.
Thank you.